Hello, everyone, and welcome to PR Future, the podcast from the University of Southern California Center for Public Relations. I'm Fred Cook, and in this episode, we're going to see how AI is impacting the PR industry and what the future looks like. And I'm really happy that we have two members of the team that worked on this study from WE on this podcast with me. First of all, Michael Sullivan, who's the Vice President of Strategic Insights. Michael works as a strategic planner, helping guide brands to data-backed insights that drive smart campaigns. Before he joined WE, he was with Weber Shandwick for 9 years, running the insights and digital content across all the different sectors. He's also a USC grad. And also joining us is Lindsey Bastani, who's an EVP at WE. She's been there for 17 years. She runs the technology practice and helps tech-driven brands navigate disruption and advance their corporate reputation. She's a trusted advisor and expert in tech-forward narratives and storytelling campaigns. Michael, let me start with you. We did this survey last year, and there's some definite differences, but there was one thing that stood out to me most of all. Last year, it seemed like people were curious about AI, but they're a little bit afraid of it. How would you characterize the change over the past 12 months?
Yeah, our interest in AI in 2023, when we first did this study, was very nascent. It seemed very promising, but we were asking communicators, finger in the wind, how do you feel about this? And 18 months on, these communicators have a much more real sense of what it's capable of, what's meaningful benefits and its limitations. The one thing that we were really intent on doing this year, in addition to getting that year on year, how do you feel about this? We really wanted to understand, has AI done anything for workplace culture? What are the actual benefits of an AI-enabled communicator? And what does that tell us about its potential impacts on a broader comms organization? And the really profound findings of the study lied there. Communicators who use AI more are more excited to come to work because of the availability of AI tools. They're 93% more likely to say they feel valued for the work they do. And they're consulted more by colleagues on things like tech and innovation. So it's that kind of cultural takeaway that we think is the big, profound, interesting part that goes beyond just how are you feeling about AI in this moment.
It's really interesting. And with a lot of innovations, there's an adoption curve. This one has been more rapid than any of them. It usually does start with this place of fear and hype and sort of distrust, which I think we saw more last year. But it's moved into this place of adoption and people actually trying it out. And there's really two factors there. One of them is personal. Like Michael said, it comes down to job satisfaction. If you're the person feeling valued because people are coming to you as knowledgeable about these new tools and you're excited to get into work, I mean, that's just exciting because that's kind of the engagement and igniting the employee base that we've been looking for levers for since the pandemic and the shift to hybrid. The second piece is just really about the bigger potential. If this is something that's happening with communicators in their day jobs, of sort of being on the front lines using these Gen AI and LLM tools, what does that mean for broader industries? What does that mean for this kind of not just thinking about this as a tools inflection point, but a paradigm shift in how we can rethink our role as communicators in the organization and the seat that we can help have at the table to help everybody harness this benefit.
Maybe it seems obvious, but one of the findings of the survey was that if the senior people in the company encouraged people to use AI and explore it and incorporate it in their work, then they're more likely to do that. I mean, that seems obvious, but some companies are moving that direction very quickly and others are not. What kind of culture, what do you need to do inside of a company to create that sense of excitement?
There were really three factors that the research showed us make a difference in creating that culture of AI adoption. And one of them is setting the tone that this is going to be a place of learning and experimenting and vetting to see what works, specific to the North Stars of what the organization's trying to achieve. The second part is really tying those to performance goals. And then the third piece is managers that themselves sort of set the expectation or model the behavior that we're going to be using AI in our work to think differently about how we do it. I think what's interesting about that is a couple of things. This isn't about setting a mandate and pushing down a set of tools on people. This is more cultural shift and change management. And tying back, Fred, to the conversation from last week about employee communications, then a lot of this does come down to the immediate supervisor, just as you saw last week,
Yeah.
where if your immediate supervisor is helping you set goals and modeling the behavior and setting the right tone, but then also backing away and giving you the autonomy to experiment and make this your own and find your own value within your role, that's where we really see the culture shift happen.
And Michael, what are PR people doing with AI? What tasks do they seem to be using AI most frequently?
What the data shows is communicators are using AI most heavily for content creation, data analysis, and landscape research. When I'm talking with comms teams, the desire to get better at content creation is very high. Even the very best communicators can have a tough time staring at a blank cursor on a Word doc and feeling that pressure of having to create something out of nothing. A lot of the teams we talk to, especially in our education product, AI Academy, they just want to know how to write better prompts so that the first draft that they create is closer to useful than if they simply ask, hey, write me, an 8-paragraph news release on X and then expect brilliance. In the work that we're doing in our agency, which might skew a little more sophisticated than others, we're doing a ton. I like to say the value in AI is best at getting you from input to insight faster. So I use it for most personally in understanding a media landscape because AI can read the full text of hundreds or even thousands of articles at scale and then describe to me the main themes. That's something that I couldn't possibly do with dozens of hours or hundreds of hours, and it can do it in the course of a day, less than that. I have a colleague. He is primarily focused on creating custom GPTs using Microsoft Copilot Studio, for example, which is helping us turn things like scoping or drafting intake briefs into this more turnkey solution using chatbots. But even in small ways, I haven't used a thesaurus in 2 years. Every time I'm trying to write copy, especially in strategy where we have to be really brief and really punchy, I have a thesaurus that can deliver synonyms that, start with a certain letter or rhyme with a certain word. It has a greater ear for nuance and connotation. So those are some of the ways that we're finding a lot of value in these tools.
Last year and this year, we asked people about their use of certain products. What did you see there in terms of the increase or change?
So the biggest year-over-year jump in product use was Copilot. Copilot wasn't called Copilot actually when we conducted the survey 18 months ago to give a sense of how long it's been. But back then was a feature integrated into Bing search. Now, Microsoft has done this excellent job of making sure that AI is woven through every single one of their products in the Office suite. And I think proof positive of that strategy is how much that year-over-year survey showed the jump in Copilot usage and uptake.
Yes, and they have an article in our upcoming relevance report written by Microsoft about their work with Meltwater to combine AI and the media database. It would be a great tool for PR people who are looking to access AI as a media relations tool. I'm excited about that. We're going to be beta testing it at UFC, I think. In terms of the training, are people looking for young professionals that come in and they know all about AI, or are agencies and companies training people on the use of AI? Which is the most important right now?
From our perspective, we're not expecting people at this stage to walk in the door being experts on these tools. And that's true of all levels, whether you're an intern walking in or we're hiring a senior executive. As an organization, it's been really about having a plan, having a V team of top experts who are really steeped in these tools. We vetted 200 of them and gotten them down to the 20 that we put in our toolkit for our clients. And then designing, yes, learning and curriculum for that within the walls of our agency so that we're learning and training our staff as we go. We've done that so far with more than 200 employees and we keep it going. So that training piece is a really important emphasis point for others looking to adopt an AI culture.
Something that I think is interesting, when I was graduating Annenberg, I won't say how many years ago, but it was really important to me that I knew more than just how to write a press release or how to customize a pitch. I was a double major in the film school, so I already knew how to shoot and edit video, but I also took elective courses so that I could learn Photoshop and InDesign because I wanted to make sure that when I was interviewing for jobs against other candidates, I could say, hey, you can hire a AAE who knows how to, work with clients and smile and dial media, or you can hire me and I can do that, but I can also make client videos, or I can retouch a photo for you for social, these sort of ancillary skills to make myself a little more competitive. And I think today this research heavily suggests that those ancillary skills are knowing how to work with AI. The more you can show you know how to produce value that others don't, the more competitive you are, and the more you can create this perception in your workplace that you're innovative and resourceful.
What I love about that, Michael, is that it really comes down to something that's always been enduring, which is a curiosity factor. And if you are curious about our craft and where it's going, and you're expressing that coming in, regardless of the specific suite of skill sets for that moment in time, that's an enduring quality. And AI itself has just been such a uniquely huge catalyst to spark that creativity and additional skill building. So I think both are definitely true.
And people in the survey also said, in addition to that training and support, they want an autonomy in their use of AI. I thought that was an unusual choice of words. Why is autonomy important?
So Lindsey might recall at our firm, we once took this agency-wide training for managers that was geared around how do you foster skills in others. And the big takeaway was, if your direct report comes to you and says, show me how to do X, you can show them and they can do it, but they won't have any attachment to the work or any investment in that solution. Conversely, if they hit a wall and you say, okay, let's work it out together. How do you think we should try and solve this? And then you sit back and you act as a sounding board and as an advisor, they'll feel more ownership over the process that they helped come up with, and therefore more ownership in its success. So what I think you're seeing in the data is a similar thing in AI. If you create this environment that encourages people finding their own solutions, but with the latitude that works the best for them, they're going to be more invested in the process. They're going to be more invested in the tools, the solution that they come up with, and therefore more invested in the output. They're going to try and work harder to make sure that the end result is something special and something that they take personal ownership of.
I think the need for autonomy is also a reflection of just the ever increasing spectrum, this sort of constellation of skills that the communications industry is demanding in today's environment. So rather than prescribing a particular tool or skill set or application of AI for everyone to use, speaking back to what people got really excited about, it says it's adding value and richness to their work. This isn't about waving a magic wand or replacing specific skill sets writ large. It's about learning how to use this as a tool to make the work that you specifically do each day richer. And that is very personal as well.
What impact do you think that AI will have long-term on PR agencies? Do you have any feel for whether or not it's going to make our lives easier, or we'll need less people to do the work? One of my students turned in a paper. She created a PR firm, AI PR firm, and she said the fees would be $15.99 a month. That scared me a little bit.
So far, what we're seeing is this is only the beginning. If,
Yeah.
in a year's time, we're to a place where the majority, 2 out of 3 of our communicators are already using this tool, we know that this is going to be part of the future of our industry, full stop. There's also just a lot of optimism here for our field. So contrary to the idea that we're going to be able to race to the bottom of bill rates and automate everything, instead, I would look at this as a new set of tools we can use to address the ever increasing complexity that's happening within communications, that's happening in the changing landscape of influence, and with the myriad of polycrises that we're constantly helping our organizations address across all their audiences. So I think we should look at this as a paradigm shift and a chance to rethink the purpose of the role of communications within the organization. And the optimistic side of that is the role of communications is actually only increasing.
Yeah, I'm tickled by the story you told, Fred. I with all due respect, I think the $15.99 a month agency sounds great, but those of us who spend a lot of time working in these tools, if this question is simply, hey, we're launching product X, can you give me a PR plan for that? You are going to get a PR plan, and it will look like hundreds or thousands of PR plans that have been written before it. And you and I both know that that's not how you break into news. by doing something that every other brand has done before you. So these tools can get us more efficient and can be, exogenous pushes that get our thinking going in a different direction than we might have done it otherwise. But at the end of the day, it's your expertise as a communicator, as what works with media, as what works in the market, to discern and add value and leverage these tools properly to get something brilliant. It's not going to give you brilliance right out of the box.
Well, we'll see what happens as things progress. I thought $15.99 was a little cheap on myself, but I asked her if she would want to revise it, and she said no. That's what she was going for.
I mean, a license to OpenAI right now is $20, so
yeah, she's going to need a little more money up front. Michael, last year the survey was called Fascinated and Frightened. It seems like those words are not necessarily appropriate anymore, but how would you characterize the change in a year?
Yeah, that was one of the things that we thought was really interesting in terms of comparing what we saw last year versus this year. So compared to a year ago, that frightened has really dropped off. So concerns around factual errors and misinformation are still number one year over year, but communicators are 27% less concerned about factual errors and misinformation than they were a year ago. They're 25% less concerned about disinformation, 44% less concerned about algorithmic bias, and 36% less concerned about algorithmic transparency. And that's the frightened side. The fascinated side has also fallen off a bit. So compared to last year, the number of people expecting AI to remove tedium from their work has dropped by half. Now you can hear that and say, okay, some of the shine has come off this fancy new thing. It's not the magic wand to remove, all the boring tasks out of your day. But what we're also finding is there's a ton of use cases related to AI that are being left on the table. And some of those things could be the solution to removing the tedium from some people's day. But because some communicators are sticking to the more obvious applications of the technology, they're really leaving on the table a lot of ways where AI could provide a valuable benefit.
As we looked at this across the survey, content creation was the primary use for AI, but media relations was farther down the list. Can you explain that and tell us what's happening in that arena?
Yeah, I think what we're seeing in the data is mostly a function of what sort of obvious applications of the tools. Communicators are using it for content because they can see how it writes a lot of content quickly. So the communicator gets to play, curator and editor. But I think less obvious is how do you even use it for media relations? But some of these tools, they can search the internet, they can read recent stories from a specific reporter. So you could feed the tool your pitch and ask it to customize that pitch based on the interests of the reporter that you're pitching. Is it going to produce something perfect? No, but you can see how very quickly we can move away from the sort of generic mass outreach kind of mail merge pitching that I remember from when I first started doing PR. And with very little effort, it can become much more direct and much more meaningful for each reporter. That, to me, is one of the really aha uses of generative AI that is really being left on the table for most people.
I think it's interesting that the tasks that are the most underused, like media relations, coverage reporting, and measuring PR impact, are the ones that we kind of all thought out of the gate would be the automated ones. And what that tells me is that there's still such a role here for the human curation and the human perspective in those very core parts of our role. Everything that Michael said about thinking about media relations more expansively when you think about using AI tools to help it is important, because it is less about getting to the reporter or writing a biography on them really quickly so you have a nice background before you go in. It is more about using AI as a way to think more deeply about what that reporter's interests are, what their audience is going to care about on the other end, developing a set of prompt library for your team to use to put your story pitches through the perspective of the audiences that they're going to land with, and use that to anticipate questions that help you strengthen your pitch before you even send it. That sort of takes media relations into a more sophisticated place. And there, I think AI can be a great tool for that.
Do you think reporters can tell when something has been written to them with using AI?
I think they'd be able to tell if you kept it in first draft form for sure.
Yeah.
They're going to have a really sharp eye for that as writers themselves. So that's where thinking of AI as a partner for first drafts, but not final, is really important.
So we're going to become all editors instead of writers in this
Moving up
case.
the masthead.
That's right. That's right. Speaking of that, what would you say to people that are been in what would you say to people who've been in the industry for a long time, really not up on technology, but they feel like their company should be doing something in AI? How do you bring them around and get them on this path?
First of all, I'd say they're not alone. The research showed that 64% of people still are saying they find it difficult to stay abreast of all the tools and technology and updates that are flooding into the market. So that's just a natural place to be for where we are right now. I think it's about asking yourself, what role do you have to play in helping your team stay a step ahead of the craft and a step ahead of where the communications needs to go? As a leader, the great news about this research is part of your role could just be create a culture of adoption, create the expectation that we need to set goals in this direction, that we need to explore training in this direction, and that we need to start experimenting ourselves, and then trust the whole team around you. There's going to be someone on your team right now who is absolutely geeking out about this and dying to tell you all the ways they've used it to unlock more value in their work. So I would say keep a really open ear and be tapping them as the expert that they are and bring that out to the rest of the team.
I don't know what your experience has been, but the corporations are a little slower, a little more careful about adopting a lot of AI initiatives in their communications.
Well, definitely, but it stands to reason they have a lot of proprietary data that where that data goes, where it lives, what kind of security protocols are in place in a lot of these AI companies come into play when you're dealing with the sensitive kind of information that you're often a steward of as an in-house communicator. A lot of the trainings that we run are with major tech companies that are just taking, first tentative steps, even now, a good 2 years on in the explosion of generative AI, are taking just kind of tentative first steps into how to use the technology and what kind of practices are kosher and not, depending on what risk tolerance they have. So that's a lot of the conversations that we're having with those kind of in-house communications teams.
We've seen a need for in-house communications teams for the communications lead to step up and play a convener role about how are we going to think about AI for this company writ large beyond the communications role, because it is a conversation between communications and legal and employee communications and training and learning and development. And like many other trends and changes that we've seen over the last 5 years, communications tends to emerge as the voice, getting everybody convened and making decisions about what the North Star philosophy is going to be around this latest tool and innovation.
When we decided to do the second survey, I was wondering whether there would be enough change to make it worthwhile over that time. And I was pleasantly surprised that there was a lot of change, that people are actually adopting this fairly rapidly. But as you said, Lindsey, we're still at the beginning of the race, so to speak. What do you see happening over the next year, if you could predict that?
I think over the next year, organizations will kind of shift from this place of have you tried and should we do to what end? Ultimately, what is it that we're trying to enhance about the work that we do, the story we're telling in the world, the way that we're accruing to trust and reputation? And when we get that, it's going to quickly clarify the use cases that AI can most accelerate and those that will just kind of hit the cutting room floor and we'll move forward.
Michael, how about you? What do you think we'll find out a year from now? Where people are going to be even more excited or more valued for their expertise in this area?
Yes, it will. It will be a perfect line up and to the right in increasing value. I think the big thing right now, a lot of the generative AI tools that have inspired a lot of this enthusiasm have been sort of generalist tools. It's a chatbot that can answer almost any question you ask it very adeptly. And I think people have found great inspiration out of that, but they've also discovered a lot of limitations with a tool that can do everything. And what we're going to see is a lot more specialized tools that can do fewer things, but can provide a lot of value within very limited spheres. And that is going to be where a lot of the value is unlocked over the next 12, 18, 24 months.
Lindsey, what AI tools do you use?
I'm using Copilot daily, if not by the minute, in the browser, in Word documents to summarize and synthesize points I'm trying to get across. And then leaning on the work that Michael and a lot of our strategists and data scientists do to accelerate getting to insight faster. Part I'm really excited about is the faster we can get to predictive, which is, the holy grail. Where is the conversation going to go next? That's really where I want to be on the pulse of that.
Michael, how about you? Where do you use it?
So there's a media landscape analysis tool that I have been working in for 4 or 5 years now called Quid. You feed it a topic and it will get you every story that falls within that topic. And then it used to be, when I started working in this tool, once it analyzed the media landscape, it was then on you, communicator, to go through its analysis and correct it. And that work would be 8 hours, sometimes 12 hours, really digging in the data to understand what is happening in this media landscape. Now with generative AI, a tool can read all of those stories at scale, every single word, in a fraction of the time it would take me. And it can do that work for me that, like I said, would take 8 to 12 hours in maybe 30 minutes. And it's that kind of stuff when we're talking about trying to get smart in new sectors very quickly. That is proof positive of exactly what these tools are capable of and where they're finding the greatest value, at least in my work as a communicator.
And we're a university, so we have a lot of students listening to our podcast. What advice would you have for someone graduating in a year that wants to work in a PR firm? What advice would you have for them about AI?
The thing that I find so surprising with most technologies, you find that it's younger people, younger professionals who tend to be the early adopters, and then they wind up having a sort of reverse mentorship role within their agencies where older communicators are learning from younger ones. The thing that surprises me every time I come to guest lecture at USC, which I do, probably about once a semester, is that the uptake of generative AI among younger people is much lower than you would expect.
Mm-hmm.
Whenever I ask classes, it's never more than 50% of hands. It's usually more like a third of students are raising their hands saying that they spend a lot of time in these tools. And I think this data, the survey that we conducted, really shows that if you want to leg up and you want to be seen as an expert from day one in your new communication role, knowing how to use these tools effectively and efficiently and write really good, detailed prompts that bring back results that are deep and valuable and go further than someone else could do. Getting good at that while you're still in an academic environment, for me, is number one, full stop.
My advice for a student would be to use AI as a companion in staying really curious about the cultural dialogue in the media landscape. You don't have to be working in-house or at an agency already to practice how to use AI to evaluate the conversation that's happening in the media and serve back up to you critical questions that would be asked by different audiences, or assuming the persona of a communications leader at a particular multinational brand. What questions would they have about, today's top 10 headlines? If you can use it as a tool to stay sharper on the dialogue that's happening, you'll have a springboard into the work that you're going to be asked to do when you do enter the work in the career field, which is connect my story to what's happening out in the world. Use it as that bridge.
So just to stay informed, I heard that a lot of people are now using ChatGPT as a search engine instead of Google. Have you seen that? Are you doing that?
I certainly use Copilot that way. So we have a protected enterprise Copilot environment where, we can quite safely ask it anything that we might need to. And I use that all the time in strategy. Often you're looking for a data point that really helps sell a point. And better than I could using Google, 5 years ago, I can go to Copilot and say, hey, are there any recent studies that say this or that sound like that? And it will surface within seconds. It can parse my question in very natural language. And in seconds, it will surface either that study exists or that it doesn't, but at least I'll know quicker than I would have trial and error in Google.
And for the 64% of people who are still feeling overwhelmed by the tool spread, these tools are getting easier and more intuitive to use as well. So when you enter a search on Copilot to understand a topic that you are interested in, it will serve you up the next creative prompt question. And you can just keep pushing and keep learning more and more about that topic until you have a greater understanding of it. So it isn't necessarily rocket science. And I do think that it serves up what you're searching for in a way that is more complete, and you can have a conversation with it and then therefore with the next person that you want to bring into that topic and greater understanding in a much faster way.
And it cites its sources. So
Yeah.
I can then decide if I think where it got its information is credible or not, which is a fantastic piece of the technology.
In the PR industry, we've seen a lot of technology changes over the last 20 years. The internet and then social media and now AI. Do you think this is going to have a faster curve, a trajectory in terms of its adoption than the previous technologies?
I do, because I think it's pervasive across every part of a communicator's job. It's not just a change in one of the channels or the myriad of channels through which we need to tell our story. It's also AI is the story itself that we're talking about, whether that's helping our organizations launch new AI tools into the world or share with the world how they've used AI to improve their operations. But at its core, it's a language model. And as communicators, there's nothing more fundamental to what we're doing than working with language to understand the world and express a point of view that moves people to action. So the fact that it has such legs into the fundamentals of what we do, the stories that we're telling today, all the channels that through which we need to tell them, and the culture through which we're doing all of that work, I think it's a bigger shift than anything else we've ever seen.
It's interesting what you said. I think that our PR is a very dynamic field, and this has made it even more dynamic. We seem to be at the heart of everything that AI can do, affects everything that we do. And I think it's going to be a big factor. And it's exciting to see people heading in that direction and being enthusiastic about it and even feeling valued because they understand it. I look forward to our survey in another year. We'll see the kind of progress that we've made. But I really thank both of you for joining me on this podcast and sharing your insights. And fight on.
Fight on. Thank you for having us, Fred.
Thank you for listening to PR Future. Tune in next time, and we're going to talk about the brand new relevance report, which is also about artificial intelligence. You can listen to our podcast on Spotify, Apple, or any of your favorite platforms. This episode was produced by Marshall Winfield and Izzy Helenchild, and executive produced by Ron Antoinette. You can find the report that we discussed today in the show notes. My name is Fred Cook, and this is PR Future.